History is often written by the victors, yet sometimes there are victors who are forgotten by history itself. We frequently hear of the slave ships crossing the Atlantic, of chains, of pain, and the stripping of human dignity in the New World. That is a scar that can never be erased. But on the other side of the hemisphere, upon the tumultuous waves of the Indian Ocean, there was another story. A story where Africans did not arrive to toil in cotton plantations, but arrived to become generals, naval admirals, and even kings. Imagine a world where the blood of Ethiopia and Sudan flows freely through the veins of royal families in India and Pakistan. Imagine black men rising from the very bottom of society, who, through intellect and the blade, made the greatest Mughal emperors tremble in fear. They built impregnable fortresses amidst the open sea. They ruled vast territories, and they left behind a legacy of power blending two races, two cultures. This is not a legend. This is the truth about the Siddis, the Habshi lost black kings of the East. Why have their names been erased? Where does that bloodline flow today? Today, we will brush away the dust of time to witness a different face of black history, the face of power and royalty. If you wish to join me in preserving these priceless historical tales, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. It is the only way to ensure the flame of knowledge is never extinguished. Let the journey begin. Part 1. The call from the other side of the OCEA. The ocean has never been a barrier separating humanity. On the contrary, it was mankind's first superhighway where destinies collided to forge history. To understand the African royal bloodline in South Asia, we must turn back the clock thousands of years, to a time when the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean served as the heartbeat of a colossal trade network. Unlike the transatlantic slave trade that came later, which was industrial and brutal in its intent to strip away all humanity, the movement of Africans to the East carried a far more complex and multifaceted nuance from the bustling ports of East Africa, in lands that are now Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, and Sudan. Men and women stepped onto the triangular-sailed Tau boats. They departed with various identities. Some were free merchants, carrying ivory and gold. Some were sailors, those who understood the sea better than anyone else. But many were indeed slaves. However, the concept of slavery in the Islamic world and the Indian Ocean at that time did not equate to being treated as perpetual chattel. In this social structure, an enslaved person could be a soldier, a guardian, and paradoxically, that could be the first stepping stone to touching supreme power. The land of East Africa, known to the Arabs as Balad al-Sudan, or the land of the blacks, and more specifically Al-Habash Abyssinia, or modern day Ethiopia, was a place that produced people of immense physical strength and indomitable spirit. Arab, Persian, and Indian merchants soon realized that the Habshi possessed more than just the muscle for manual labor. They possessed a rare loyalty and an innate military capability. When brought to the opulent courts of Delhi, Gujarat, or the Deccan, these Habshi were not cast out into the fields. They were brought into the palace. Why the palace? Because the kings and sultans of India lived in constant fear of betrayal. They could not fully trust the local nobility, men who always had powerful families backing them, ready to overthrow the throne to seize power for their own kin. In this context, African soldier slaves became the perfect choice. They were outsiders, men with no family, no roots in the new land, and thus they knew only absolute loyalty to the master who bought and raised them. But this calculation by the kings inadvertently sowed the seeds for an uprising no one expected. When a Habshi soldier proved his talent, he was promoted. They were given command of armies, management of the treasury, and held the keys to the most critical fortresses. Gradually, the line between the servant and the ruler began to blur. Black men, with skin as dark as the night and imposing physiques, began to realize that the true strength of the kingdom lay not in the hands of the weak kings sitting on the throne, but in the hands of those who held the swords protecting it. History records that very early on, in the 13th century within the Delhi Sultanate, figures like Jamal-ud-Din Yaqut appeared, Habshi, who rose to become the closest confidant of Queen Razia Sultan. Their relationship, though shrouded in rumors and the jealousy of the Turkish nobility, was the first proof that Africans had entered the center of the South Asian political arena. Yaqut was not just a bodyguard. He was an advisor, a wielder of actual power, and his subsequent death was the spark that ignited the Queen's downfall. That was the first lesson. African blood, once mixed into the political stream, would create tsunamis. But that was only the beginning. The presence of the Habshi did not stop at individual roles. They began to form communities, military factions. They were no longer isolated individuals torn from their homeland. They became a class of new military elite. They called each other Siddi, a title derived from the Arabic word Sayyid, meaning master or sir, a way to show respect for their status. From those chained in the ship's hold, they stepped onto the shore, took up arms, and looked their rulers in the eye with the posture of equals, perhaps even potential conquerors. And as the wheels of history turned to the 15th century, in the fertile lands of Bengal in eastern India, the ambition of the Habshi could no longer be contained within the role of guardians. They wanted more. They wanted the throne. The winds from East Africa had fanned the flames of power, preparing for a spectacular transformation that history books call the rule of the Habshi. But before arriving at that dynasty, we must understand the thorny path they walked, from children kidnapped on the Somali coast to becoming the terrifying phantoms in the marble corridors of royal palaces. It is a journey of blood, tears, and the extraordinary transformation of the human condition. Part 2. The first HBS says the Dhow ships docked at the bustling ports of Gujarat or Bengal. Men and women from East Africa stepped ashore, carrying with them not just meager belongings, but a destiny yet to be written. In the eyes of the Arab merchants or local officials of that time, they were collectively known by a single name, Habshi. This term originated from the Arabic Al-Abash, referring to Abyssinia or modern-day Ethiopia. However, with the flow of time and the expansion of trade routes, Habshi gradually became a common noun, a label for all black people from Africa, regardless of their tribe or region of origin. But behind that seemingly simple name was a social class silently forming, a class embodying the greatest paradox of the era: slaves, yet holders of the power over life and death. Imagine the political landscape of India in the 13th and 14th centuries. This was the era of the Delhi Sultanate, where minarets reached for the sky, asserting the power of Islam on Indian soil. But inside those magnificent palaces was a shark tank. The sultans, though seated on velvet-cushioned thrones, were constantly besieged by the jealousy of the Turkish and Afghan nobility. These aristocratic factions, priding themselves on their noble lineage, always sought to manipulate the king, turning him into a puppet. It was within the loneliness of such power that the sultans turned to the Habshi as a lifeline. The Habshi were brought into the court not to compose poetry or discuss philosophy, but to serve as a wall of steel, with superior physiques and extraordinary endurance forged in the harsh lands of the Horn of Africa. They became the most trusted bodyguards. Their presence beside the throne was a silent yet weighty message the king sent to his officials. I have a force that obeys only my command, and they are ready to draw their swords if you dare to rebel, precisely because they had no blood ties or factions with local families. The loyalty of the Habshi became the most precious asset in a world rife with treachery. But history always takes unexpected turns. When you hand a slave a sword to protect you, you simultaneously give them a sense of power. The first Habshis at the Delhi court, like Jamal-ud-Din Yaqut, did not resign themselves to forever remaining shadows behind the curtains. They began to learn. They observed how conspiracies were woven, how power was divided, and how gold coins flowed into the treasury. They realized that in this Game of Thrones, origin mattered less than capability. Yaqut, from a keeper of horses, rose to become Amrokale, master of the royal horses, a critically important position that allowed him direct daily access to Queen Razia Sultan. His ascent shocked the light-skinned Turkish nobility, men who could not accept bowing before a black man who was once a slave. Yaqut's subsequent death, in a rebellion by jealous nobles, was not an end, but a statement. It affirmed that the Habshi had become a formidable political force. The blood he shed watered the ambitions of thousands of other Habshis scattered across the subcontinent. Following that event, instead of being purged, the Habshi were even more heavily relied upon in the kingdoms that broke away from Delhi, especially in Bengal to the east and the Deccan Plateau to the south. Rulers in these distant lands realized that to resist the later rise of the Mughal Empire or hostile neighbors, they needed absolutely loyal war machines. And so, a migration of power began. The Habshi were no longer just personal bodyguards. They were appointed as governors, entrusted with managing vital seaports where money from international trade flowed like waterfalls. In Bengal, they were known as the palace guards, holding the keys to every gate entering the capital. Their status was so high that, in many cases, a nod from a Habshi general could decide who would next step up to the throne. From the status of cargo, they became kingmakers. This was the most critical period of psychological transformation. These first Habshis broke the invisible cage of social prejudice. They proved that dignity lay not in skin color, but in talent and bravery. They began to build mosques with their own architectural style, patronized the arts and culture, gradually assimilating and becoming an inseparable part of the South Asian elite. But human ambition is bottomless. When standing so close to the throne, when holding the army and treasury in hand, the question arose, why must I serve those weaker than myself? Why must I be a kingmaker when I could become the king? That question smoldered in the hearts of Habshi generals in Bengal, waiting for the winds of time to fan it into a fire that would consume the old dynasty, opening a chapter of history soaked in blood, but full of glory. The era where the slave crowned himself. Part 3. The coup of the EUEUCHS. The shadows of power are often thickest right at the foot of the throne. In the late 15th century, the fertile region of Bengal where the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers merged to flow into the Great Sea. Tragic and paradoxical drama reached its final act. This is where the haunting question of the previous chapter finds its most brutal answer, when the protector becomes the assassin, and when the slave decides that he is worthy of being the master. At that time, Sultan Jamal-ud-Din Shah, the ruler of the Ilyas Shahi dynasty, was reigning over a prosperous kingdom. But he realized he was living in a gilded cage guarded by the very Habshi soldiers he and his ancestors had purchased. The number of Habshis in the palace had swelled into the thousands. They held every key position, from the commander of the palace guard, and the keeper of the treasury, to the most intimate eunuchs serving in the harem. Their presence was so dense that not a single order from the king could leave the palace without passing through Habshi ears and eyes. Recognizing the danger nipping at his neck, Sultan Shah decided to act to strip them of their power, but he was too late. In history, the hesitation of a ruler is always a death sentence. On a fateful night in 1487, Shahzada, the chief commander of the Habshi palace guard, and also a eunuch lead, a bloody coup. There were no great battles on the open field. Only the sound of silent footsteps in marble corridors and the cold glint of daggers. Sultan Shah was assassinated within his own palace, and the unthinkable happened. Shahzada, a slave, a eunuch, stepped over the body of his master to sit upon the throne, proclaiming himself Sultan Barbak Shah. This was a moment that shook the conscience of the Eastern Islamic world at the time. Reflect on the irony. a man who had been stripped of the ability to procreate, viewed by society as incomplete, now held the ultimate symbol of masculine power sovereignty. Shahzada's act was not merely a usurpation. It was the revenge of repressed destinies. It sent a message that power does not come from the blood flowing in one's veins, but from the blade held in one's hand. However, violence begets violence. Shahzada's reign lasted a mere few months before he was betrayed and assassinated by the very Habshi guards who had once been loyal to him. But his death did not extinguish African ambition. It merely transferred power to someone more worthy. Saifuddin Firuz Shah, another capable Habshi general, stepped up to take the throne. Unlike the brutality of his predecessor, Firuz Shah was a true ruler. He was not just a warrior, he was a builder. Under the reign of the Habshi Sultans, Bengal witnessed a period of unique architecture and culture. The Firuz Minor and Gowra towering structure that still stands today is the most eloquent testament to their legacy. It was not just brick and stone. It was a material manifesto of black people in South Asia. They wanted to tell the world, we were here, not as passers-by, but as masters of the land. But the tragedy of power is that it is always lonely. The rule of the Habshi in Bengal, though glorious, was as fleeting as a shooting star. They were isolated amidst a sea of indigenous people and Arab nobility, who always viewed them as filthy usurpers. By 1494, after less than a decade in power, the Habshi dynasty collapsed in a bloodbath led by the vizier Sayyid Hussain. Thousands of Habshis were killed, and the rest were expelled from Bengal. It seemed like the end of the African dream of royalty in India. The survivors, carrying their wounds and resentment, silently left the palaces of the East to drift towards western and southern India. They were knocked off the throne, returning to the status of exiled mercenaries. But in that desperate flight, destiny smiled once more. They did not know that the barren and harsh lands of the Deccan Plateau were waiting for them. There, it was not an end, but the place where a legend 1,000 times greater was about to be born. The flame extinguished in Bengal would burn more fiercely than ever before in the form of one man, the one who would become the nightmare of the Mughal Empire. Part 4. The Deccan Plateau. The promised L&D when the Habshis were expelled from Bengal. They carried with them the humiliation of the defeated, yet within their veins, the blood of warriors still boiled. Where were they to go in a vast subcontinent teeming with enemies? Fate, or rather geopolitical alignment, guided them south towards the Deccan Plateau. If northern India was a land of endless, fertile wheat fields, easily trampled by the hooves of invading armies, the Deccan was a different world entirely. It was a land of rock and fire, of volcanoes extinct for eons, creating natural fortresses standing tall against the sky. It was precisely the harsh, rugged nature of this terrain that became the perfect cradle for the rebirth of the African people. In the 16th century, the Deccan was not a unified bloc. It was fragmented into 5 small Islamic sultanates: Ahmednagar, Bajapa, Golconda, Badar, and Berar. These 5 kingdoms were like 5 hungry wolves, always snarling and tearing at each other for territory, yet simultaneously forced to band together against the giant tiger stalking them from the north, the Mughal Empire. In this context of ambush on 10 sides, the need for military manpower became more urgent than ever. The sultans of the Deccan did not need poets or sycophants. They needed men who knew how to fight until their last breath. And who could do that better than the Habshis men with no homeland to return to? The arrival of the Habshis in the Deccan was not merely a replenishment of troop numbers. It shifted the balance of power within the courts. Here, society was deeply divided between 2 factions: the Dakhinis, indigenous Muslims or longtime settlers, and the Afakis, newly arrived foreigners, primarily fair-skinned Persians and Turks. The Afakis, with their light skin and self-proclaimed noble lineage, often looked down upon the dark-skinned locals. In this simmering struggle of class and race, the Habshis, though also foreigners, found deep empathy with the Dakinis, sharing dark skin and suffering the prejudice of the white nobility. The Habshis and the local Decanists formed a natural, enduring alliance. Here, in this barren land, the Habshis were no longer seen merely as exotic commodities. They became the backbone of the military. They were entrusted with guarding the most critical fortresses perched atop treacherous peaks, places that disheartened enemy troops just by looking at them. The scorching climate and hilly terrain of the Deccan reminded them of their distant Ethiopian homeland. They felt as if they had returned home. And when a soldier's soul finds an anchor, their talent begins to soar. Unlike in Bengal, where they hastily seized the throne only to be destroyed, in the Deccan, the Habshis learned the lesson of patience. They accumulated power slowly but surely. They became prime ministers, naval admirals, controlling the Konkan coast, and, most importantly, they held the economic lifeline by controlling maritime trade routes. The Deccan kings, willing or not, had to admit that their thrones rested on the shoulders of these black giants. Without the Habshis, kingdoms would have quickly been flattened by Mughal hooves. This was the period where the concept of loyalty was redefined. The Habshis were loyal to their masters, but they also began to be loyal to their own community. They sponsored one another, bringing brethren from Africa, creating a cross-border network of power. The Deccan became the promised land where a slave could dream of becoming a prime minister. And it was from this dry but vibrant soil that the greatest seed of black history in Asia germinated. Among the thousands of slaves brought to the Deccan at that time was a young Ethiopian man with eyes burning with intellect. His name was Chapu. He did not yet know that he would not just be a soldier, but would become a nightmare haunting Mughal emperors for decades. He was Malik Amber, name that would be etched in gold in world military history. But before becoming a legend, he had to endure the brutal trials of fate, painful lessons that would forge him from a rough stone into a diamond. Part 5. Malik Amber, the phoenix from the acid chasm, itched the dusty pages of 16th century history. There are destinies born seemingly only to be forgotten, yet through extraordinary will, they carved their names into the cliffs of time. The story of Malik Amber begins not in the silks of a palace, but in the scorching heat of horror in present-day Ethiopia. In 1548, a child cried out his first breath and was named Chapu. No one, not even his parents, could have foreseen that this dark-skinned child, running upon those barren hills, would one day hold the destiny of an entire subcontinent across the ocean in his hands. But destiny is a cruel director. To grant someone ultimate glory, must first cast them into the deepest abyss of suffering. Tragedy struck when Chapu was just a teenager. War, famine, or perhaps brutal slave raids tore him from the arms of his family. From a free human being, Chapu was transformed into a commodity. He was thrown onto slave ships, stripped of his name, stripped of his dignity, left only as a strong body to be priced. Imagine the terror of a young boy watching the shores of his homeland fade behind the violent waves, not knowing where he would drift. That was Chapu's first death, the death of innocence and freedom. But from that death, a great seed began to sprout. Chapu was taken to Baghdad, the center of civilization in the Islamic world at that time. Here, fate smiled upon him in a peculiar way. The master who bought him was not a cruel overseer, but Mir Qasim al-Baghdadiya, wealthy and learned merchant. Noticing the sharp intelligence hidden behind the sorrowful eyes of the young slave, Qasim did something rare. He did not force Chapu into heavy manual labor, but decided to educate him. Chapu converted to Islam and was given a new name, Amber, meaning amber, a fragrant gemstone, symbolizing value hidden within a rough exterior in Baghdad. Amber was exposed to knowledge of administration, finance, and military affairs. He learned how to manage ledgers, how to operate an organization, and most importantly, strategic thinking. This was the pivotal point that set Amber completely apart from thousands of other Habshi slaves. While his compatriots knew only how to use muscle to wield a sword, Amber learned how to use intellect to command that sword. He understood that power lay not only in killing, but in managing resources and winning hearts. The years in Baghdad forged Amber from a slave into an intellectual, a brilliant administrator hidden under the guise of a servant. But the life of a slave is never smooth. After the death of his kind master Mir Qasim, Amber was sold once again. This time, the currents of life pushed him south to the windy and sunny lands of the Deccan in India. He was purchased by Chinese Khan, the prime minister of the Ahmednagar Sultanate. The irony and the inspiration was profound. Chinese Khan was also a Habshi, a former black slave who had risen to the pinnacle of power. The meeting between these two men was deeply symbolic. It showed Amber a living model of what he could achieve. Looking at Chinese Khan, Amber did not see a master. He saw his own future. Under Chinese Khan, Amber was given the opportunity to practice what he had learned. He participated in military campaigns, learning how to maneuver troops in the treacherous hilly terrain of the Deccan. He witnessed the decline of the Ahmednagar kingdom, the internal divisions, and the growing threat from the Mughal Empire to the north. When Chinese Khan passed away, Ahmednagar fell into chaos. This was the moment the phoenix truly spread its wings. With no patron left, no one to protect him, Amber decided he would no longer bow to serve any incompetent ruler. He gathered exiled Habshi and Arab soldiers, building a mercenary army of his own. From the ashes of slavery, Amber rose. He had no throne, no royal lineage, but he possessed a weapon far more terrifying, an absolutely loyal army and a strategic mind ahead of its time. He began the Game of Thrones, not as a pawn on the board, but as a player. And the world was about to be astounded, for this black man, once sold for a few silver coins, was preparing to shake the very foundations of the empires of the East's greatest kings. Part 6. The Master of Guerrilla Warfare in the early 17th century. The Mughal Empire in northern India was not merely a nation. It was a colossal beast, devouring everything in its path. Under the reign of great emperors like Akbar and later Jahangir, the Mughal army was likened to an unstoppable flash flood. They possessed tens of thousands of armored cavalry, thousands of war elephants equipped with iron plating and cannons with terrifying destructive power. Facing this perfect war machine, the tiny kingdoms of the Deccan were like deer trembling before the claws of a tiger. According to the usual logic of history, Ahmednagar should have been wiped out in mere months. But history did not follow that script, because the Mughals encountered an opponent who followed no rules. Malik Amber. Amber understood better than anyone the cost of asymmetry. He knew that if he arrayed his forces on the open plains for direct confrontation with the Mughals, his mercenary army would be crushed like an egg against a rock. He had no money to feed war elephants, not enough iron to cast cannons, but he possessed something the Mughals did not, an intimate knowledge of the terrain and a military mindset that broke free from old dogmas. He created, or rather perfected, to an art form, a style of fighting known as Barjagiri, the forerunner of modern guerrilla warfare, instead of large-scale clashes. Amber broke his army into highly mobile, light cavalry units. His soldiers, mostly indigenous Marathas and Habshis, wore no heavy armor. They moved like shadows in the night, launching lightning raids on Mughal supply convoys and then vanishing into the dense forests before the enemy could regain their senses. Amber's strategy was based on the principle: avoid the strong, strike the weak, harass ceaselessly. He turned the rugged, hilly terrain of the Deccan into his greatest ally. Deep ravines and treacherous mountain paths, which Mughal elephants and artillery could not traverse, became superhighways for Amber's cavalry. Imagine the utter frustration of the Mughal generals. They brought cannons to blast down fortresses, but they found no enemy to shoot at. They brought war elephants to ram down city gates, but their opponents lurked in the mist. The Mughal army, massive yet slow and cumbersome, bled day by day from 1,000 small cuts. Supplies were looted, soldiers were ambushed while fetching water, and camps were set ablaze in the night. Amber turned the Mughal expedition into a logistical nightmare. He did not defeat them in a decisive battle. He defeated them by exhausting them, starving them, breaking their spirit. Emperor Jahangir's hatred for Malik Amber became a personal obsession, a scar on the pride of a monarch. In his famous memoirs, Tu Sakai Jahangiri, the most powerful emperor in the world at that time, did not spare any insults. He called Amber, that black wretch, the unfortunate one, the abominable Habshi. Why would an emperor use such bitter words for a rebel? Because deep down, Jahangir knew he was powerless. He could conquer the world, but he could not catch that dark shadow. The peak of this obsession is illustrated in a famous painting by the royal artist Abul Hazem, created around 1616. In the painting, Emperor Jahangir stands atop a globe, drawing a bow to shoot an arrow through the severed head of Malik Amber. The head is depicted with dark skin, thick lips, and eyes still staring wide open. But the bitter truth behind that painting is this: it was merely a delusion of the king. In reality, Jahangir never touched a single hair on Amber's head. The fact that an emperor had to resort to painting to satisfy his thirst for victory shows the colossal stature of Malik Amber. He forced the most powerful enemy to acknowledge its existence, not through submission, but through fear and hatred. Under Amber's command, the Nizam Shahi army of Ahmednagar repelled the Mughals time and time again. He not only protected the kingdom, he counterattacked, reclaiming lost territories. Amber proved to the world that military strength lies not in numbers, but in speed and intellect. He transformed Maratha farmers into the most skilled warriors, laying the foundation for the rise of the great Maratha Empire later under Shivaji. It can be said that without Malik Amber and his Barjagiri tactics, the map of Indian history would have been drawn completely differently. From a slave, he became a master of the art of war, the man who taught empires the most painful lesson, that even a giant elephant can be brought down by an organized swarm of bees. Part 7. The Kianj make a victory on horseback may bring glory, but only wisdom on the political chessboard brings longevity. Malik Amber, having repelled the torrential assaults of the Mughals, stood at a fateful crossroad that every conqueror must face: seize the throne or stand behind it. With an army in hand and vast territories beneath his feet, Amber could have easily proclaimed himself king, placed a jeweled crown upon his head, and forced all to kneel and call him sultan. But he was intelligent enough to recognize the deadly trap of vanity. He understood that in the feudal world of India, rife with prejudice, his slave blood would forever remain an indelible stain in the eyes of the orthodox Islamic nobility. If he ascended the throne, he would become a usurper, a common target for all neighboring kingdoms from Bajapa and Golconda to his arch enemy, the Mughals, to unite and destroy, instead of choosing the precarious seat of the king. Amber chose to become the shadow that enveloped it. He decided to play the role of the kingmaker. His first task was to find a legitimate puppet. He scoured the countryside, searching for any surviving descendants of the shattered Nizam Shahi dynasty. He found a royal boy, Murtaza Nizam Shah II, living in obscurity. Amber brought the boy back, placed him on the throne, and established a new court at Parenda. But everyone, from court officials to foreign envoys, understood a naked truth. The king's words were merely an echo. The will of Malik Amber was the command to consolidate absolute power and legitimize his position. Amber executed a bold political move, marking the first blending of African blood into Indian royalty. He married his own daughter to Sultan Murtaza Nizam Shah II. This marriage was not born of romantic love, but was a covenant of blood. By turning his descendants into members of the royal family, Amber blurred the line between servant and master. He was no longer just a prime minister for Killa Sultanate. He was the king's father-in-law. The blood of the Habshi, once deemed inferior, now flowed in the veins of the future heirs to the throne. This was a silent but earth-shattering revolution, breaking the taboo rules of caste and race that had existed for centuries in South Asia. Under the title of regent, Amber held full executive, judicial, and military authority. He ran the country from a position of singularity but immense responsibility. Unlike dictators who only knew how to plunder, Amber ruled with the mindset of a strict father protecting his family. He knew that for the puppet on the throne to be secure, the kingdom must prosper. He treated ambassadors from Portugal, the Netherlands, and England with the demeanor of a true monarch. European documents from that time, when describing Amber, exuded a mix of respect and fear. They called him the Black Commander-in-Chief, the only man who could guarantee the security of the silk and spice trade routes passing through the DECCA. However, being the man behind the curtain was never easy. Amber constantly faced treachery from the very puppets he installed. When Sultan Murtaza Nizam Shah II came of age, the young king began to feel suffocated under the colossal shadow of his father-in-law. Whispers from sycophants, plots of poison, and assassination attempts began to kindle in the harem. The climax of the tragedy came when Amber was forced to remove the very king he had created, replacing him with a more pliable Child Burhan Nizam Shah III. This action demonstrated the necessary ruthlessness of politics. When a tool is no longer useful, it must be replaced. For Amber, the survival of the Ahmednagar kingdom, the legacy he had bled to preserve, was more important than the life of any individual. Even his own son-in-law, throughout 2 decades of regency, Malik Amber proved that a black slave could govern better than any king of noble lineage. He did not need a crown to be king. He was king in reality, king in the hearts of the army, and the uncrowned king who terrified his enemies. This wise choice, standing in the darkness to control the light, allowed him to hold onto power until his very last breath, avoiding the tragic fate that his predecessors in Bengal had met. He taught history a lesson. Power does not lie in the title you are called, tease, but in who holds the keys to the granary and the sword of the army. Part 8. Amber's legacy. More than a warrior usually. When the clamor of swords fades, great generals often become redundant or lost in times of peace. But Malik Amber was a rare exception. He understood that war is merely a means to preserve life, while construction is the ultimate purpose of power. The slave, who had been stripped of his homeland, carried within him a fierce aspiration to transform the arid Deccan land into a prosperous paradise where people did not just survive the day, but could thrive. This mindset transformed him from a renowned general into a brilliant statesman, a great architect whose legacy still breathes to this very day. In 1610, Amber decided to move the capital and build an entirely new city named Kirk, meaning window to the world, known today as Aurangabad. Like the cramped and dark medieval capitals, Kirk was planned with a vision of a modern metropolis. Amber wanted to prove that black people knew not only how to destroy on horseback, but also how to lay the bricks of civilization. He built palaces, mosques, and shaded gardens, turning a desolate, rocky wasteland into a bustling urban center, a crossroads of Persian, Indian, and African cultures. But the greatest miracle of Kirk lay not in its skyscrapers, but deep underground. At that time, water was gold in the parched Deccan. Understanding the suffering of the people, Amber designed and directed the construction of a magnificent underground water supply system named Narampur. This was a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering centuries ahead of its time, without pumps or electricity, relying solely on precise calculations of terrain gradient and gravity. This system of underground tunnels channeled fresh water from distant mountains to every street and house in the capital. It is astounding that after more than 400 years, while the palaces of the Mughal Empire have become ruins, the water in Malik Amber's Nayar system still flows. It continues to provide cool water to the people of Aurangabad today. It is a living monument, an immortal bloodline flowing within Mother Earth, a testament to the superior intellect of the great black engineer. Beyond bricks and water, the greatest legacy Amber left was the trust in the hearts of the farmers. Rising from the bottom rung of society, he understood the misery of the downtrodden. Amber implemented a radical land reform unprecedented in history. He abolished the harsh, arbitrary tax systems of local officials, replacing them with a fixed tax based on actual crop yields. For the first time, farmers felt they were treated fairly. They were no longer serfs, but masters of their own land. This humane policy created a solid economic foundation for the kingdom. And more importantly, it purchased the absolute loyalty of the indigenous Maratha people. When the Mughals attacked, they fought not for a stranger king, fought to protect Malik Amber, the man who had brought food and warmth to their families. Malik Amber's legacy extended far beyond the borders of a nation. He created a precedent, inspiring model for the Siddi and Habshi communities across South Asia. His success elevated the status of black people in Indian society at that time. He patronized scholars, poets, and artists, turning his court into a vibrant cultural center. In his time, people no longer looked at black people with the disdain reserved for savage slaves, but with the respect accorded to the ruling class. When Malik Amber passed away in 1626, and nearly 80 years old, the entire kingdom mourned him. Even his greatest enemy, the Mughal Empire, had to bow in farewell. A Mughal court historian, who had once used his pen to insult him, finally wrote these lines in the chronicles: "In warfare, in command, in judgment, and in just administration, he had no equal." History has never recorded a slave who attained such greatness. An admission from an enemy is the highest medal of honor. Malik Amber was gone, but he left behind a solid foundation, a torch that other cities would take up to write further heroic chapters on the high seas, where the fortress of Janjira was waiting to roar. Part 9. Janjira, the invincible fortress standing on the Konkan coast of western India, gazing toward the horizon where the Arabian Sea merges with the deep blue sky. One witnesses a surreal spectacle, a defiance of time and the laws of nature. Rising amidst the white-capped waves is not a desolate island, but a colossal black stone fortress emerging from the ocean depths like a Leviathan awakening. This is Mira Janjira, the only fortress in India that was never conquered, and its masters were none other than the Siddi's descendants of Abyssinian sailors and warriors who turned these waters into their own kingdom, a place where even the mightiest empires had to halt in helplessness. The story of Janjira begins with its name. Janjira is a corruption of the Arabic word Jazira, meaning island. But for the enemies who coveted it, Janjira meant a death trap. In the 15th century, when the first Siddis set foot on this coast, they did not seek land to farm like peasants. They sought the freedom that only the open sea could provide. Initially, this island was merely a massive rock jutting out of the sea, a shelter for local fishermen. But with the sharp, strategic vision of men accustomed to riding the crest of waves, city leaders realized this was the key to controlling the entire western maritime trade route. Whoever held this island held the throat of every ship carrying spices and silk that passed through. Legend has it that to seize the island from local chieftains, the Siddis did not use swords initially, but wits. They disguised themselves as liquor merchants, asking permission to dock and move crates onto the island to rest for the night. But inside those wooden barrels was not wine, but elite Siddi warriors. When night fell, the liquor spilled from the barrels, blades were drawn, and the island changed masters in a single night. This story, whether fact or fiction, accurately reflects the nature of the Siddis: audacious, unpredictable, and full of stratagem. However, seizing the island was one thing, keeping it was another. The Siddis understood they were surrounded by enemies. The Portuguese, with their modern warships dominating the Indian Ocean, Cain, the Mughal Empire craving access to the sea, and the rising Maratha forces on the mainland. To survive, they had to transform this island into something indestructible. And so, one of the greatest military architectural feats of the 17th century was born. For 22 long years, thousands of tons of black granite were transported from the mainland to the sea. City builders, combining Islamic architectural techniques with a knowledge of tides, erected towering walls so thick that cannonballs struck them like mosquitoes hitting steel. The stones were bonded with a mixture of lime, sand, molasses, and molten lead, creating a seamless structure that withstood saltwater corrosion for centuries. The greatest miracle of Janjira lay not in its cold stone walls, but in the life within it. Surrounded by salty seawater, right in the center of the fortress were two gigantic natural freshwater lakes that never ran dry. This was considered God's blessing to the cities, allowing them to hold out in the fortress for years without fear of dying of thirst. This mysterious freshwater source turned Janjira into a military Noah's Ark, where their army and families could survive lengthy sieges. To protect this sanctuary, the Siddis turned Janjira to a giant sea urchin with 572 cannons pointing in every direction. Among them were 3 legendary guns: Khalil Bangadi, Landakazam, and Chavri. Most notable was Khalil Bangadi, the 3rd largest cannon in India, cast from 5 different metals to prevent overheating. Its roar was described as earth-shattering, capable of obliterating any ship daring to approach within miles. It was said that whenever Khalil Bangadi fired, the surrounding waves trembled, and the pride of Portuguese or Maratha admirals sank to the ocean floor along with it. Janjira quickly became a thorn in the side of every great power. The British, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and later the Maratha Empire under Shivaji all tested their strength against this fortress. They tried everything from intense bombardment and food blockades to tunneling under the seabed, or even attempting to use hot air balloons to drop soldiers, according to some anecdotes, but all failed miserably. Janjira stood there, looming, proud and arrogant. The city flag bearing the crescent moon and star was never lowered by an enemy's hand. But Janjira was not just a military fortress. It was the heart of an independent microstate. The rulers of Janjira were called Nawabs. They established an organized administrative system, minted their own coins, and maintained a powerful navy that roamed the Arabian Sea. The cities here were no longer mercenaries serving other sultans alone. They were kings in their own right. They intermarried with local noblewomen, creating a unique city Maratha community, blending African and Indian cultures. The existence of Janjira is a powerful declaration of sovereignty and black power in world maritime history. While across the Atlantic, Africans were chained in slave holds in the Indian Ocean. Their brothers stood on the command decks, defeating the most powerful fleets of Europe. Janjira is living proof that when given opportunity and freedom, black people could build invincible empires. That black fortress, to this day, still stands amidst the wind and waves, like an old, loyal soldier guarding the memories of a golden age, whispering to the sea the story of kings who never bowed. Part 10. The War with the Marathas in the mid-17th century. The balance of power in India began to shake violently with the rise of a new force. The Maratha Empire under the leadership of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaji. Shivaji was not merely a warrior king. He was a military genius who saw what previous emperors had missed. He understood that he who has the navy has the sea. With the ambition to build an independent Hindu empire free from the yoke of Mughal rule, Shivaji knew he had to control the Konkan coast. But on that path to the sea, there was a jet black boulder blocking his vision, a sharp thorn piercing the flank of the nascent Maratha Empire. That was Janjira and the Siddi people. The confrontation between Shivaji and the Siddhis was not simply a struggle for territory. It was a battle for survival between two ideologies, two identities. Shivaji. The Siddhis were foreigners, agents of the Mughals, obstacles to the dream of Indian autonomy. But to the Siddhis, the sea was the only home they had, and freedom was something they had purchased with the blood of their ancestors. They were not ready to kneel before anyone, be it the emperor of the north or the king of the mountains in the south. And so, the waves of the Arabian Sea began to turn red. Shivaji threw his full might into removing this thorn. He attacked not only militarily, but also through economic strangulation. But Janjira, with its endless supply of fresh water and resupply from the sea, stood firm, as if mocking him. Realizing that Janjira could not be taken by conventional direct assaults, Shivaji made a bold decision unprecedented in the military history of the time. If he could not capture the enemy's fortress, he would build another fortress right in front of it to challenge them, just a few miles north of Janjira, amidst the open sea. Shivaji ordered the construction of Padma Doricals, known as the Lotus Fort. Imagine the magnificent spectacle. Under a rain of cannon fire roaring from Janjira, thousands of Maratha workers resiliently carried stones to fill the sea. They built Padma Durg as a silent but steely declaration of war. Two fortresses, one black, one white, standing tall, facing each other across the ocean, like two gladiators glaring at one another before a fight to the death. Every day, the sound of cannons echoing between the two citadels was like rolling thunder, turning the peaceful waters into a corridor of death. The Siddhis, under the command of capable leaders like Siddi, Johar, and later Siddi Yaqut, proved themselves masters of naval warfare. Their small, light, and extremely agile boats glided over the water like dragonflies, weaving through the bulky Maratha warships to launch daring raids. They attacked at night, setting enemy ships ablaze, and retreated to the safety of the fortress before dawn. The bravery and superior seamanship of the Siddhis forced Shivaji, who was invincible on land, to admit a stalemate at sea. He once lamented, "I may conquer the earth, but I cannot tame the wild waves of Janjira." The climax of the conflict came when Sambhaji, Shivaji's son, resolved to fulfill his father's wish. He mobilized a massive force, even plotting to fill the sea to create a causeway connecting the mainland to Janjira, turning the island into a peninsula so his cavalry could charge across. It was a mad idea, but it demonstrated the desperation of the Marathas against this impregnable wall. However, the sea seemed to side with the Siddhis. Great storms washed away the reclamation works, and the timely intervention of the Mughal fleet forced Sambhaji to retreat. Janjira was victorious once again. But the price of victory was never cheap. To survive the terrible pressure from the Marathas, the Siddhis were forced to play a dangerous political game. They accepted an alliance with the Mughal Empire. The Mughals provided finance and legitimacy, while the Siddhis provided naval power. From independent kings, they became Mughal admirals. This was a step back in status, but a step forward in survival strategy. The Mughal flag began to fly on the Janjira watchtowers, alongside the crescent flag of the Siddhis. The decades-long war with the Marathas forged the Siddhis into a nation of iron-willed warriors. They not only kept the island, they kept their honor. In Indian military history, Janjira is recorded as Ajinkya, the invincible. It is eloquent proof that, even when surrounded on all sides by enemies many times more powerful, a small but united and resilient community can still write heroic pages of history. The roar of the Calais Bangadi cannon firing at the Maratha fleet was not just the explosion of gunpowder, it was a scream of freedom, affirming that black people in India were not marginalized figures of history, but powerful protagonists in the grand drama of the age. Part 11. The Sachin Dynasty. Janjira was the symbol of raw military power and indomitable resistance. Sachin was the embodiment of a subtler aspect of Siddi history, legitimacy, and aristocratic authority. Located in the prosperous Gujarat region of western India, the princely state of Sachin was born not of piracy or bloody naval battles, but of treaties, political calculations, and the mindset of true rulers. This was where Africans shed their warrior armor to don the robes of Nawabs, recognized kings. The story begins in the late 18th century, as the power of the Mughal Empire waned and the British began redrawing the map of India. In this chaotic context, a branch of the Siddi clan from Janjira, led by Siddi Abdul Karim Muhammad Yaqut Kanai, founded the state of Sachin in 1791. Unlike their brothers in Janjira, who guarded the fortress amidst the sea, day and night, the Nawabs of Sachin chose the path of deep integration into the Indian aristocratic system. They were no longer strangers from Africa. They became the royals of Gujarat, ruling over fertile lands, prosperous villages, and bustling markets. What made Sachin special? It was status. In the complex hierarchy of princely states under the British Raj, Sachin was one of the few kingdoms ruled by Africans that enjoyed the privilege of a gun salute. The Nawabs of Sachin were entitled to a 9-gun salute whenever they appeared at royal ceremonies of the British Empire. This was not merely a noisy ritual. It was a measure of power and respect. Reflect on the irony of history. While millions of black people in the New World were in chains and denied their humanity, in Sachin, men of the same skin color were greeted by white British officials with bows and roaring cannons. It was a proud paradox of African blood in the East. Life at the Sachin court was a vibrant tapestry, blending Islamic tradition, Indian culture, and African heritage. The Nawabs lived in opulent palaces, draped in priceless pearls, and possessing jewelry collections that made neighboring Maharajas envious. They were not just rulers, they were patrons of the arts. Under their reign, music, painting, and architecture flourished. The Sachin Royal Band, combining Western and Indian instruments, was famous throughout the region. They hosted tiger hunts, polo matches, and lavish banquets, asserting the class of a royal lineage no less dignified than any ancient Indian dynasty. Yet, beneath the glittering veneer, the Nawabs of Sachin never forgot their roots. They maintained close ties with the Siddi community and Sufi mystics. In oil portraits surviving to this day, we see images of Sachin kings with dark skin, deep eyes, and majestic demeanor, wearing diamond-studded turbans. They were proud of their Habshi blood. They did not try to whitewash their history to dissolve into Indian society. Instead, they turned their difference into a unique mark of distinction. In the eyes of the people of Gujarat, the Nawab was not an outsider, but a benevolent king, a protector of justice and order. The Sachin dynasty was also known for its openness and progressive thinking. They allowed religious freedom, encouraged education, and built modern infrastructure. Their marital alliances reflected strong cultural fusion. The Nawabs often married princesses from other Islamic royal families, and their descendants carried mixed blood, creating a unique anthropological beauty. The princes and princesses of Sachin grew up educated at prestigious universities in England, becoming global citizens, diplomats, and talented military officers. The existence of the Sachin dynasty lasted until India gained independence in 1947, when the last Nawab signed the instrument of accession to the Union of India. Although political power ended, the spiritual legacy of Sachin remains. It is a beautiful chapter of history where black people did not fight to survive, but to assert royal dignity. The story of Sachin reminds us that racial prejudice is merely an artificial barrier. When placed in an environment that respects talent and virtue, the slave of yesterday can absolutely become the king of today. And the cannon saluting them will echo forever as a triumphal hymn of self-respect. Part 12. The African Bodyguard of the Nizam in the 18th and 19th centuries. As the Mughal Empire faded, Hyderabad rose like a brilliant star in the South Asian sky. The rulers here, known as Nizams, possessed immense treasures of diamonds, palaces straight out of the Arabian Nights, and authority over a territory as large as France. But the eternal law of kingship never changed. The more gold and silver, the more eyes coveted. Suspicion crept into the Nizam's every slumber. They could not fully trust Indian courtiers or indigenous Muslim noblemen who always had tangled webs of relationships and private calculations. In the loneliness of ultimate wealth, the Nizam's gaze once again turned toward Africa. A massive recruitment drive took place from the ports of Somalia, Yemen, and Ethiopia. Hundreds of young men with the most robust physiques and the steeliest gazes were brought to Hyderabad. They did not come to be laborers in servitude. Okay, they came to join an elite unit of the highest order, the Risolia Hubs, also known as the African Cavalry Guards. This was no ordinary army. They were the final living shield, separating the king from death. Can you imagine their image during ceremonial parades? Tall black soldiers, clad in vibrant uniforms embroidered with gold thread, wearing majestic turbans, riding selected Arabian horses. Okay, they moved with the discipline of machines and the spirit of lions. Their presence was not just for protection, but for intimidation. To the people of Hyderabad and the officials, the AC Guards were symbols of untouchable power. Just catching a glimpse of these giants, standing guard at the gates of Chamahala Palace or King Kothi, was enough to dissolve any thought of rebellion. The Nizam trusted them implicitly. He called them his adopted sons. Why this special favor? 'Cause for these city soldiers, the Nizam was their entire world. Okay, were strangers in a foreign land, with no clan to cover for them, no land to dispute. Their glory was tied to the king's safety. If the Nizam fell, they would lose everything. This symbiotic relationship created an ironclad loyalty that gold could not buy. History records that in the most chaotic moments, when political factions in Hyderabad fought one another, only the African Guards stood firm, guns in hand and eyes unblinking, ready to sacrifice themselves to protect their master. But the life of the AC Guards was not just swords and guns. The Nizam granted them a dedicated land right in the heart of the city, to Levan area, still known today as AC Guards. Here, a little Africa formed within the heart of India. They built families, raised children, and created a unique hybrid culture. They spoke fluent Urdu with a Hyderabadi lilt. They ate spicy biryani, but when night fell, the beat of the Ngoma drum resonated. The wild Damal dances, songs praising ancestors from across the ocean, rose up, reminding them of their roots. Their status was so high that even wealthy nobles had to show respect. In royal processions, the African Guards always marched closest to the Nizam's palanquin, a privilege no one else held. They were handsomely paid, provided with top-quality food, and equipped with the most modern weapons of the time. Anecdotes tell that Nizam Mahbub Ali Khan, the 6th Nizam, loved these guards so much that he frequently visited their barracks, dining and chatting with them like friends, blurring the line between king and subject. The existence of the African Guards in Hyderabad lasted until the mid-20th century, when India gained independence and the Indian Army moved to annex Hyderabad in 1948 Operation Polo. These city soldiers found themselves in a dilemma. The dynasty they swore to defend to the death had collapsed. The last Nizam Osman Ali Khan surrendered. But even in that moment of defeat, the spirit of the African Guards was not broken. They laid down their weapons, not out of fear, but by the order of their master. Today, if you walk through the AC Guards neighborhood in Hyderabad, you will still encounter their descendants. Though no longer wearing royal uniforms, though blended into daily life as drivers, athletes, or office workers. A hint of the pride from a golden age still lingers in their eyes and gait. They are living witnesses to an era when Africans stood in the most honored position beside the throne, men who proved that loyalty and dignity are universal languages, transcending all barriers of skin color and borders. Part 13. The blending of bloodlines and culture power may be seized by the sword, but eternal existence can only be achieved by taking root. The Siddi and Habshi people, after years of conquest, realized they could not remain forever guests on Indian soil. They needed a place to belong, not just a geographical territory, but a connection of flesh and blood. And so, a miraculous blending process took place. Silent yet powerful, blurring the boundaries between two sides of the ocean, creating an anthropological and cultural tapestry unlike any other. Unlike slavery in the Americas, where racism prevented formal interracial mixing in Indian Islamic society, the barrier of skin color was much thinner. Powerful city generals and nobles married indigenous women. These were daughters of Muslim aristocratic families or converted Maratha women. These marriages were not just unions of two individuals, but the intersection of two civilizations. The point of these loves carried the blood of two worlds, the wild strength of Africa and the subtle, profound depth of South Asia. Over generations, the physical distinctiveness of the seas gradually changed. Skin as dark as night might have lightened, tightly curled hair might have straightened, but one thing was never lost: the cultural soul. If you walk into city villages in Gujarat, Karnataka, or Hyderabad today, you will witness a mesmerizing religious blend. Most cities follow Islam, specifically the mystical Sufi tradition, but their Islam is unlike anywhere else. Breathes the air of ancient African animism. The greatest symbol of this spiritual syncretism is the worship of Baba Gora, legendary Sufi saint of African origin. Legend has it that Baba Gora was an Abyssinian merchant and missionary who used spiritual power to protect people from demons. Today, his shrine in Ranthambore, Gujarat, is the holiest sanctuary of the Siddi community. Here, religious boundaries are erased. Muslims, Hindus, and Parsis all come to pray. But the rituals are what truly speak volumes. Stirring the earth's festival nights, the silence of the shrine is broken not by somber prayers, but by the rapid beat of Mugerman drumsa, type of drum distinct to East Africa. Siddi men and women begin the Jamal dance. They dance frantically, spinning, stomping their feet powerfully on the ground, mimicking the movements of animals and hunting warriors. It is a trance state where humans transcend the body to commune with the divine. That drumbeat, that dance, is the invisible thread connecting them to ancestors who passed away on the other side of the ocean. Right in the heart of India, the echo of the African wilderness still rises, not as a cry of mourning, but as a joyous hymn of life. This blending also seeped into language and cuisine. The Siddhis speak Gujarati, Marathi, or Urdu as fluently as their mother tongue. Yet ancient Swahili words still linger in their vocabulary. They eat curry, but their preparation retains the secret techniques of African cuisine. They have become Indians, but they are special Indians. They did not completely melt into the cultural pot. Rather, they are like a potent spice, retaining their own flavor to enrich the entire dish. However, assimilation also carries the sadness of forgetting. Its blood mixed over centuries. Many descendants of the Siddi kings of old no longer held noble status. They became farmers, laborers. The palaces of yesteryear are now ruins, and the stories of illustrious generals have gradually become legends told by the fire. But even without royal power, they still hold another kingdom, the kingdom of identity. The greatest legacy of this blending is acceptance. The Siddhis proved that humanity can overcome racial differences to live together and love. They are living proof that India is not just a land of brown people, but a common home for all races that seek refuge here. African blood did not disappear. It flowed into the great river of humanity here, making that river deeper, wider, and richer. And in the eyes of a mixed Siddi child today, we still see the reflection of both the vast skies of the Serengeti and the gentleness of the Ganges River. Part 14. The shadow of colonialism, every empire, no matter how glorious, eventually faces its sunset. For the Siddi, dynasties, and communities in India, that sunset did not come from internal decay, but from the sails bearing the Union Jack of the British Empire. The arrival of the British on the subcontinent in the 18th and 19th centuries not only altered the political map, but also shifted the social structure and the fate of black people who once held supreme power, whereas under the Mughals or the Deccan sultans, Siddis were judged by the swords they wielded and the loyalty they offered. Under the Victorian gaze of the British, they were viewed through the prism of race. As the British East India Company began to swallow Indian kingdoms one by one, they brought with them a cold and pragmatic administrative mindset. The British did not need resourceful black kingmakers like Malik Amber. They needed compliance. The specialized military skills of the Siddis, which had been their ticket into the aristocracy, suddenly became obsolete. In the face of modern rifles and Western-style military discipline, the role of the steel wall protecting the throne was gradually replaced by treaties of protection. The greatest tragedy unfolded at Janjaru, the invincible fortress. For centuries, the Siddis there had held their heads high against every enemy. But the British defeated them, not with bloody naval battles, but with papers. Through subsidiary alliances, the British stripped the claws of this sea tiger. The Nawabs of Janjira were allowed to keep their throne, allowed to keep their titles, but they lost actual control. Their once legendary naval fleet was disbanded or absorbed, their tax collection rights supervised, and their foreign policy stripped away. From lords of the Arabian Sea, they became puppet kings receiving pensions from the colonial government. Fort Janjira, where the Kalo Bangadi cannon once roared, gradually sank into the silence of a historical monument rather than a military base. In Sachin and Hyderabad, the situation was similar but more subtle. The Nawabs of Sachin were categorized by the British into the ranks of salute states. The British stroked their egos with medals, tea parties, and elaborate titles like Knight Grand Cross. But behind the glitter of these rituals was a confinement of power. The Cid and Sachin became actors in the play of Pax Britannica, playing the role of exotic Oriental kings to adorn the greatness of the British Empire. Real power had shifted from the palace to the hands of British political agents. But the most devastating impact of colonialism was not on the ruling class, but on the common Siddi community. Under Indian feudalism, the path of social mobility was always open to Siddis through military service. A slave soldier could become a general. But the British, with their rigid racial classification, slammed that door shut. They disbanded the private armies of the princes, throwing thousands of Siddi mercenaries onto the streets. With no wars to fight, no courts to serve, these proud warriors lost their livelihood. They were pushed to the margins of society, forced to retreat into the deep forests of Gujarat, like the Gir forest or the slums of big cities, to perform heavy, menial labor. From the status of royal bodyguards, they became porters, charcoal burners, living in poverty and oblivion. The British colonial system also brought with it prejudices of superior and inferior races. In British eyes, the Siddis were lumped together with primitive tribes or lower classes, completely erasing the regal legacy their ancestors had painstakingly built. The colonial period was a long, dark night where memories of Malik Amber or the admirals of Janjira were deliberately erased or distorted. History books written by the British often described the Siddis as troublesome pirates or passive slaves, ignoring their history-making roles. This darkness stole not just wealth, but more dangerously, it stole the pride and identity of a people. However, though backed into a corner, the fire within the Siddi people was never fully extinguished. In impoverished villages, by campfires, stories of a glorious past were still whispered, waiting for the day to step into the light once more. Part 15. The Last Descendants. When the tricolor flag of India and the crescent tan star flag of Pakistan first flew in 1947, Marking the end of the colonial era, it also signaled the death knell for the feudal princely states. For the royal city families of Janjira and Sachin, the world they once mastered collapsed overnight. Instruments of accession were signed, honorary cannons ceased firing, and the illustrious titles of Nawab gradually became hollow honorifics on paper. Kings who once held the power of life and death became ordinary citizens in a new democracy. Their fate was severed by the bloody border of the partition. Some royal members, carrying nostalgia for the Islamic Golden Age, migrated to Pakistan. In Karachi or Lahore today, the blood of Siddi Nawabs still flows quietly in the veins of elite families, businessmen or politicians, but the story of their African origins is often hidden behind the walls of gated villas. They have completely dissolved into the South Asian elite, leaving their ancestral crowns in the museums of memory. But on the other side of the border, in India, the story takes on a different roar and grittier hue. Tens of thousands of common citizens of the soldiers, bodyguards, and sailors of yesteryears still cling to the land their forefathers bled to protect. You can find them deep in the Gir forests of Gujarat, living in harmony with Asiatic lines, working as tour guides or laborers. You can meet them in the Uttara Kannada district of Karnataka, or in the narrow alleys of the AC Guards area in Hyderabad. The image of the modern city is a poignant study in contrast. They possess African features with dark skin and curly hair, but their souls are thoroughly Indian. They speak Hindi, Gujarati, Kannada, Malay, curry, and pray in mosques or Hindu temples. However, the glory of the past has not saved them from the poverty of the present. The majority of the city community today lives in difficult conditions, lacking access to education and healthcare. From wielders of power, they have become one of the most marginalized groups in society, struggling for government recognition as scheduled tribes to receive affirmative action. Yet, amidst that hardship, the flame of identity has never been extinguished. It burns brightly in the Damal dance, their most precious, intangible cultural heritage. Whenever the drums beat, the Siddhis seem to relive the glorious moments of their ancestors. It is not just a dance, it is a spiritual ritual of connection, the call of the African wild echoing through centuries. Thanks to this dance and cultural preservation efforts, the world is beginning to pay attention to them again. Documentaries are being filmed, historians are reopening old archives, and names like Malik, Amber, or Janjira are being spoken again with respect. A new ray of hope is also emerging from the very physical superiority nature gifted them. Many young Siddhis today are finding a path out of poverty through sports. With strong genetic traits for endurance and speed from East Africa, they are becoming potential track and field athletes, representing India in international arenas. It is a strange continuation of history, if 500 years ago physical strength helped them become warriors protecting the throne. Today, that strength helps them seize glory on the track, reaffirming their status in modern society. Closing this 15-part journey, we realize that the story of the Siddhis is not just the story of a race, but an epic of human survival and adaptation. From rocking slave ships, they stepped up to the pinnacle of power, ruling vast lands, and then submerged back into the quiet flow of history. They are living proof that South Asia was never monochrome, that African blood, though mixed, though forgotten, remains a brilliant red thread weaving through the diverse cultural tapestry of this land. The black fortresses still stand shielding the waves. The mausoleums still tower against the sky, and city children with radiant smiles are still running on the soil of their second homeland. Their history is not lost. It is transformed from dusty pages into the vibrant heartbeat of thousands of people today. Our journey to rediscover the lost royal bloodline concludes here. We have traveled together through 5 centuries, from the windy, sunny coasts of East Africa to the cold marble palaces of India. We have seen slaves become kings, eunuchs become prime ministers, and soldiers become legends. The story of the Siddhis reminds us of a profound philosophical lesson that history is never a straight line, and destiny is never ordained by origin. Even if born in chains, you can still hold the fate of an empire if you possess enough wisdom and courage. Those black kings may be gone, their dynasties may have turned to dust, but their indomitable spirit, the spirit of Malik Amber, of the Gendra warriors, will forever remain lighthouses illuminating the flow of time. Thank you for accompanying me on this special historical chronicle. If this story touched your heart, if it helped you see a different perspective on Black history and Asian history, please help me spread it. Every follow is a drop of water contributing to the great river of humanity. Please subscribe so that this river of knowledge never runs dry. Goodbye, and see you in the next journey to uncover history's mysteries.